From Brazil to the world, this is Profit Talks, a podcast produced by Hayek Global College and dedicated to exploring how you can ethically maximize profits. For more episodes, please visit hayekcollege.com/profit. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode. My guest today is Mike Masoud, a specialist in anti-corruption from the American Institute for Anti-Corruption. And Mike is originally from Lebanon and is here to talk to us about corruption today. It's an honor to have you here, Mike.
Thank you, Edson. Actually, I'm from the American Anti-Corruption Institute, and originally I'm a Palestinian, not Lebanese, but right now I'm in Lebanon in Beirut. It's okay.
So you're a Palestinian living in Lebanon right now.
Yes, this is the real story. Yeah.
Perfect. So tell us, Mike, what is in fact corruption? How would you define that?
Corruption, Edson, it's a phenomenon that has been around since human being or humankind existed. It exists all over the world. And the definition of corruption at the AACI is that it is an abuse of power or perceived power or interested power for private gain. And this gain could be monetary or non-monetary. And private gain means whether direct or indirect. Okay? So for example, bribery is an example of corruption, bribery. Bid rigging is another example of corruption, and many other types of corruption. So, but if you would like to go, for example, to the Transparency International, the way they define corruption is very simple. They say abuse of power for private gain. But, you know, at the AACI, we expanded the definition so that it becomes all-inclusive a little bit more.
And so, if I understand correctly, in order for corruption to happen, you need to have some type of power, and that power is used for private gains. Is that a necessary condition for corruption to happen, or is it more broad?
No, correct. The prerequisite to have corruption are two things. One, there must be a power, irrespective of the source of power. Sometimes the family provides someone a power to speak on behalf of family. Mm-hmm. So the board of directors, they have a power because the shareholders elected the board of directors. If you look at the minister, so if you will go to the law and the principal agent relationship, this is where the power comes to the corporate of business. So there must be power, irrespective of the source of the power. And by the way, sometimes a religious power can be abused. So irrespective of the source of power, we must have a power, someone who is interested with this power, and he should abuse it for private gain. Now, let me clarify abuse. What do we mean by abuse? Abuse means using this power for objectives that was not designed for to serve himself, not the agent who granted him or her this power.
So there's usually a reason to have such power. For example, when an elected official or the board of directors are elected to look after the country or look after the company, right? The best interests of the company. And then he uses that power for things that are not related to what he was elected for, which is using it for his own private gains or private gains of someone else, right?
For sure, you know, because by the end of the day, you know, corruption is illegal. So it is a legal concept. Corruption is a legal concept, not a management concept. So corruption, because it's legal, what corruption means in Brazil may not be corruption somewhere else, because the laws of Brazil defines corruption in a way that may not necessarily be defined in another country. So it is a legal concept.
And what are the most common types of corruption that you see?
The most common types, you know, differs from one country to another country. For example, money laundering is sort of corruptions because generally speaking, if you have corruption, sometimes it triggers money laundering, and if you have money laundering, it triggers corruption. For example, I can give you many. For example, if a bank manager, for example, accepted a bribe for someone to deposit 1 million US dollars that is obtained from illegal sources. I
Hmm.
mean, the guy would like to launder money. The payment, the bribe is called the bribe. It's called corruption. But the gentleman, he was trying to launder money. So in this example, corruption and money laundering goes hand by hand. Okay, um, but generally speaking, corruption takes place in many forms, and it's costly. It's really costly. Um, uh, in some countries, you will find corruption in the healthcare industry. In
Hmm.
other, I mean, more. In other countries, you'll find it in the financial sector. But in general, I mean, I have a concern about money laundering and
Hmm.
financing terrorism. At the level of corporations, for example, you will have bid rigging, you will have billing schemes, you have um, uh, all types of fraud schemes.
What is bid rigging? I'm not fully
Bid,
familiar with that term.
oh, that's cool. Um, Bid rigging. Well, one of the major areas in any entity where corruption occurs is the purchasing department. Purchasing department.
Purchasing
By the
department,
way,
yes.
yes, whether this, and this applies to both public and private sector. Now, for certain amounts of purchases, okay, the policy of the entity stipulates a process for purchasing to make
Yes.
sure that nobody plays with it. And this is where there is something called bidding process.
Ah,
Bidding process. And the reason why we have a bidding process, because we would like to have an equal opportunity for all the vendors, and at the same time would like to have the highest quality at a reasonable price as a purchaser or as a buyer. Now, bid rigging means there is a fraud. There is a fraud at any stage in the bidding process. Usually paying bribes, for example. For example, someone paid a bribe to get the specification of the bid before the others. Okay,
hmm.
others, or sometimes, usually I say this to my students and trainees. I say, well, if you'd like to know if there is a bid rigging or not, just monitor, who wins the bid. Does he come the last one? Because, if you'll find someone who coming the last and he wins the bid, it means, he rigged the bid. He bid because, they might change the prices before submitting the documents and
Yes.
so forth. So bid rigging means did the bribe, paying a bribe throughout the process of bidding so that, win the bribe, win the bid,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
This is at the very basic stuff.
I I'm familiar with that type of corruption now that you mention it, because it's very common in Brazil, where you would have a bid for a certain public work. You will build a bridge or something that the government needs to build, and then he's going to hire the construction companies to do it. And we've heard of a couple schemes of corruption that happen with these types of bids. So I now that you say, I'm familiar with what the concept is. And going to here, since you have an international background, living in several countries, sometimes we have the feeling that when living in Brazil, that corruption is a Brazilian thing, because people in Brazil are so corrupted. We're unethical in our essence as a culture, and that's why corruption happens. But as we can see, corruption is a worldwide problem, right? We were talking to Burke in the podcast in another episode. Burke Files, and he also said that corruption is a problem in the United States. And how do you see this phenomenon? Why is it that we have corruption widespread in the world? Is it a human nature thing? Why would you say this happens?
Well, again, it's when we talked at the beginning about the definition of corruption, I said there must be power to be abused for private gain so that we have corruption. But by the end of the day, I said, from the beginning, it's as old as human being, as mankind. Um, Let me tell you something. Um, by the end of the day, by the end of the day, there is something called greed.
Okay.
Well, it is illegal if you are greedy. Is it? No, you can
It's
be
illegal to
greedy.
breed. Uh,
No, no, you can be greedy, but it is okay. But it is illegal to be an excessive greedy guy where you committed fraud or corruption.
yes.
And so if you would like to look at it from a different perspective, well, people are corrupt because they are not only greedy, excessive greedy sometimes. But guess what? When you and I but let me give you an example. People like to hear it from me wherever I go. There is a research that had been done by someone, I cannot forget, I cannot recall his name right now. He said, well, 20% of the people, in general, 20% of the people, they are excellent. They are not corrupt. Sorry, 10% from the top. They are excellent. They are not corrupt. They do not make corruption or fraud, whatever the case is. Without any controls, they are fine. And they are the lowest 10%. They are corrupt and they are criminals, and that's why we have all these law enforcement chasing them, and that's why we have many people in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the 80% between them? You know what? It depends. In other words, if these rest 80%, if they feel that they can get away with what the ill-gotten acts, they will do it. But if they know that they can be caught, they will not do it at all.
Yeah.
So this is the reality. And let me tell you something. I'm not, by the way, just for the listeners, I'm not talking about the psychic issues here. I'm talking about the why do we have corruption? What are
Mm-hmm.
the motivation underlying corrupt
Motivation.
acts? Motivation, of course. Now we have fraud triangle. There is something called fraud triangle, where we have opportunity, pressure, and rationalization.
Mm-hmm.
They found that, researchers, they found that wherever there's a fraud or corruption, there must be these three elements:
Mm-hmm.
opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. In other words, the one who would like to defraud his employer, he must have a weakness in the internal control so that he can get away with the money and leave, or accept a bribe and deliver
Get away
information,
with.
get away with it. Now, because of the weakness of the internal control, this is an opportunity. But if the internal control structure was very strong, he cannot do it. So we
So
call
that's the
this
first part.
opportunity.
Opportunity.
Yes. Pressure.
Weak controls gives
We,
out opportunity.
in general, a weakness in the internal control or a weakness in the internal culture, etc. The pressure is this: the employee was under extreme financial pressure. For example, he's a gambler, he needs money, he would like to meet his wife's demands, and or he would like to buy a house, or he would, whatever the case is. So this
Yes.
is extreme. Or he is jealous from his colleague, he was not treated fairly by his superiors. This is a pressure. Now, this is a pressure. Now, rationalization is this: when someone commits corruption, he started to say, let me give you an example just to clarify rationalization. That I'm a cashier. I have $20,000 in the cash as a bit cash for the company. I needed a loan. I needed to have an operation to my kids. It cost me $10,000. I went to my manager. I said, please give me $10,000. He said, no. Sorry, I will not do it. So I went to my office as a cashier, and I started to think, what about the $20,000 here? I would like to have a loan, just $10,000, and I will repay it back. Of course, they are
Yeah.
not full controls. He took $10,000. He carried out the operation to his son, and then he after 1 week, to bring the money back. Nobody came to him. He started to think, well, should I bring it back? Well, I've been working here for 20 years. Why shouldn't I bring it back? They did not give me any bonus, over the years. It's my right. This is called rationalization. By the way, technically, he is justifying his corruption or fraud. So, in each corruption or fraud case, there must be three elements that constitute the fraud triangle. However, if you found these three elements exist in your entity, it doesn't mean that there is fraud. In other words, if there is a rain, the ground will be wet. But if the ground is wet, it's not necessarily that it rained. Your neighbor might have
Of
put
course.
water there. So it is if then in logic we call it. So basically, I believe that even if you have very strong laws, corruption shall exist. Because in Saudi Arabia, for example, if you will kill, they will cut your head by the sword. Still, people kills there. Okay.
So yeah, so the three points there on corruption doesn't include the punishment after corruption is committed, right? And then you said that if we're in some countries where they have very harsh measures for stealing or for corruption, like cutting your hand off in some place, and it still happens. So it wouldn't be the case that a harsher punishment decreases the amount of corruption that happens in a certain place.
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I mean, this is called criminology. They teach it, by the way, at the universities. Well, make no mistake that the law, when you design any punishment, by the way, you do not design the punishment as part of the law to punish people. The whole story is to induce people to change their behavior. So, in my opinion, if you would like to prevent corruption, don't create any motivation for people to commit fraud or corruption. For example, if there is a prevalence of the rule of law, the likelihood of corruption levels to increase is very low, because if you will make any corrupt act, you know that you will be brought to court. You are not above the law. But if you know that you are above the law, of course, this is a recipe to make a corrupt or culprit people. This is just one example. But again, if you have an ineffective judiciary branch of government, even if you have a rule of law, it doesn't lead to effective prevention of corruption.
Yes.
So it is a collective. We at the AACI, we have 10 principles, by the way, we use to judge the effectiveness of the fight against corruption. And in general, if you'd like, I can list the 10 principles to you, and you can judge by yourself whether the case applies to Brazil. For example, if you apply these 10 principles in Brazil, in my opinion, corruption will go down and very fast. And we can discuss these 10 principles whenever you like.
Oh, tell us, what are the 10 principles?
Yeah. Oh, yes. First, we call this the 10 principles of fighting corruption. We use these 10 principles to judge the effectiveness of any anti-corruption activity, whether it is in a small company or for a government or for a country. So the first principle is, and by the way, they are principle-based text rather than rule-based oriented stuff. In other words, It applies to any entity. And we have, by the way, we have standards for each principle. And they are the fundamental base, the foundation to institutionalize the prevention of corruption throughout all the entities, including the public and private sectors. We start with the prevalence of the rule of law. Second, effective internal control systems or internal control. Third,
Mm-hmm.
effective and good governance. Four, independent judiciary, independent and effective judiciary branch of government. Five, authority and accountability. Six, investment in corruption prevention. Seven, quantification of corruption exposure. Eight, certainty of punishment. Nine, no statute of limitations for any corrupt act. And 10, rewarding corruption fighters. So these
Reward.
10
What is the 10th one? Rewarding
rewarding the fighters of corruption.
fighters of corruption.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you will take these 10 principles and ask yourself this question, are they practiced in Brazil? If yes, give a score for each one, and then you will come up with your score of corruption status. For example, if of course we have a methodology to apply it, by the way, but I'm just giving you a sense of the way we go about it. Okay, but any company, any organization, public or private sector, should take these 10 principles and ask itself whether they are applied or not. And for example, let me put it this way. When I say investment in corruption prevention, well, let's look at the universities in Brazil. Do they equip their students with any anti-corruption courses as a prerequisite required course? You cannot graduate without it. If the answer is yes, perfect. If
I
the
never heard.
answer is no, well, you do not graduate students to support the country to fight corruption. You are providing students to the market just to do the same thing. Because, this is one. Let me give another example. Does the government of Brazil require the ministers or the agencies to have an anti-corruption prevention policy? There must be at each entity a corruption prevention policy.
Yeah.
Because let me give you an example. Assume that a staff member found that there is something suspicious about money laundering. If you don't have a corruption prevention policy, he will not be able to understand or to take the correct course of action to whom he is going to report such an incident.
Yes.
And
Because because if it's his boss committing the corruption, he cannot tell his boss. He has to tell to an independent source, right?
as per the law, generally speaking, usually go to a higher level of management or as per the law.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. And Mike, I wanted to come back to a point here. It was, I guess, it's more to exploring the rationalization aspect of the corruption, because as I understand, there has to be some rationalization that the person does. Taking, I guess everybody has at some point the belief that they should do the right thing, and integrity is the correct way to do thing to do, and that we shouldn't steal. And people have to rationalize why they're doing that in order to commit a fraud. And one also a point that you said is on the greed, right? And I think it's important for us to understand the definition of what you mean by greed, and how is greed affecting the corruption. Just to give you an example, for example, Jeff Bezos is the richest person in the world today, and many people accuse him of greed because he doesn't donate money he has to common cause, or he doesn't raise the salaries of his employees. I don't know much about Jeff Bezos personally. I don't know if he commits corruption or not, but as I see, there's two different types of greed. You know, the greed of the person who has made his money and doesn't want to voluntarily donate, and also the greed of steals for private gains. How do you see this different this differentiation?
I honestly speaking, the first time I came to, or I encountered the excessive greed, these two words coupled together, it was in 2008. When the financial crisis of September 2008 happened in the US, I asked myself, why did this happen? I couldn't figure out why. And even the report was issued by the assigned committee of the Congress. It's not persuasive for me to answer why. So I came across an article from a prominent lawyer in the US, and he said, I think that there was an excessive greed in the market. If you look at the word greed, well, greed is a human nature that exists in each one of us. But what the difference between one and another is the way the way you allow it to control you. Okay, because you should be selfish, but you should not be excessively selfish.
Yes.
Okay, so it is not only ethical and moral stuff, it is a human nature attributes inside each one of us. By the end of the day, let me put it in my own beliefs. I think I think we are human beings. I do not know, believe it or not, let me tell you one simple story that might be beneficial here in this context. Sometimes you'll find rich people who are committing corrupt acts. You do not know why. But for me, the addiction is not for the money. The addiction here comes to the power. They are addicted to control, and to control, they need such power. So you and I, if we are going to make the first million US dollars, okay, it will be very hard for us, and usually we like to have it. But after the 100 million US dollars, money started to be normal. So I think, in my opinion, that if you would like, I'll come back to the story. But if you would like to understand why people becomes corrupt, it's very difficult. I am one of the experts who knows how people become corrupt, but why, I do not have an answer to why. Let me give you the story. You know Bernard Madoff?
Yes.
Okay.
Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. Bernard Madoff, he committed more than 60 billion US dollars. When the judge was almost about to issue the verdict, he asked him one simple question. He said, well, can you tell me why you make it this way? You don't need anything. Can you persuade me, why did you commit fraud and corruption? I will reduce the verdict from 150 years to 75 years. He refused. You know why? Because he's going to be dead in the prison, whether he say it or not. So usually we came to know why people, they committed fraud and corruption because we ask people. And I do not like, if you know our industry worldwide, you will find that, well, someone was caught to be corrupt. He went to the prison, and after 10 years, he became an advocate of ethics, for example. How? Come on. This doesn't work. Come on. So usually we know it's very difficult because, many reasons. But if you ask me how to prevent corruption, yes. Don't put your trust in anyone, human beings, without controls. Excessive trust creates a recipe for corruption. specifically
Yes.
in the private business. So basically, you have to trust people to do business, by the way, at the same time. But everything
Mhm.
should be balanced. Everything should be balanced. Did I answer you?
Yes. Let me try to see if I can draw the line here. So there is a certain type of greed that can be, let's say, an ethical greed where I'm creating value to my customers, and I'm receiving back, and I want to sell as much as I can to create a product without lying, with doing it with transparency.
Mhm.
And then there's the excessive greed where I'm going to lie, I'm going to steal so that I can make money, even though I'm not creating I'm not creating as much value to the person that is in the other side. Would you say it would be something like that?
Uh, Almost, but I would like to just to add something else. Excessive greed, excessive greed. It is the case where one crosses the legal lines and becomes corrupt or
Okay.
commits fraud. Greed, greedy is a human behavior that is not usually lovable by others, but it should be within the boundaries of the law. When, for example, if I do not like to deal with the greedy people, but sometimes, I know that that guy is greedy, but this doesn't criminalize him. However, if he defrauded me because of his greed, oh, come on, I'll take him to court.
Yes. And what about, so we talked about greed being when we cross the boundaries of the law. But the law are also made by people, politicians who are in Congress, and they are the ones who write the law. And so, what about the problem when the law isn't the way it should be?
Um, let's go back to the basics. It's on, let's go back to the basics. By the end of the day, people is the source of power and authority.
Yes.
And people elected their representatives on the basis of the Constitution. Now, when the parliament or the representatives of the people design a law that is not in the benefit of the public, well, this is an exception. It happens, but by the end of the day, there are corrupt politicians all over the world. In each country, you have corrupt politicians. And I know countries where they designed a law for 24 hours just to defraud the people by for billions and billions of US dollars. But by the end of the day, this is not the norm. And people can change their politicians. And I think, and I believe, and I advocate that without people, there will never ever be any effective fight of corruption. And people is the driving force to fight corruption. And I think what lacks people is the following: they do not have the anti-corruption intelligence, and they are not aware about the mechanisms to fight, their sacred fight, intelligently and within the boundaries of the Constitution. And that's why, corrupt people, likes to like to invest in ignorance rather than uh, the knowledge and skills of the people. I hope I
Yes.
answered this. This is a very tricky question, by the way. We don't agree to ask me this question.
Oh, it came on the
It's
conversation.
okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. So it's hard to I guess it's hard to deal with people, and the like. I guess where we're going with this is we need more education uh, of what anti-corruption is and what the mechanisms are, so that we can pressure the political class to pass the right laws, right? And then so that comes as a culture. Let's go to questions here that we agreed upon back.
It's okay. It's okay. No, no. Feel free to ask me any question in this regard. No problem.
Yes, but this is an interesting question. So what about when there are certain authorities that in a civil society that are responsible for judging if a certain act was considered corrupt or not. For example, you have the judiciary system who does it, or the police who is the one who enforces it. And what should we do, and how should we manage a situation where we have police or the judiciary system who are practicing the corruption?
I do not understand the question clearly, but by the end of the day, any government, any democracy actually, consists of three branches of government: the judiciary branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. Now, no, each one should be independent, and should be each one branch of government should be independent and monitored carefully. Monitored carefully. But by the end of the day, things aren't rosy in all countries. And money plays big time in politics.
Yes.
And I understand that. The campaign refinancing reforms in the U.S. still, is one of the most difficult stuff there. But let me go back to the basics here in this regard and say the following. We need to have proper laws to deter and punish corrupt people. And I know that we have excellent, exceptional judges in your country who made headlines all over the world in very well-known corruption cases in your country. But if you don't have proper laws, rules, and regulations that are enforced as per the rule of law, it will be an invitation for more corruption.
Yes. So it's a matter of having an enforcement of the rule of law, which it comes down to. And then you think there's a what is the best way of having? Do you think it's in education, the way that we fight corruption?
It's a collective process. It's a collective. I mean, fighting corruption. We have a definition. We have a definition at the AACI, the American Anti-Corruption Institute. We have a definition of fighting corruption. Let me read to you our definition, okay, for fighting corruption.
Okay.
Make sense? Okay.
Go ahead.
It is a process effected by those charged with governance, employees, citizens, and other stakeholders to provide a reasonable assurance that those entrusted with power did not abuse it for a private gain or gains. It is a holistic, multidisciplinary, encompasses all economic sectors, results-oriented, and continuous process. This is what we call fighting corruption at the AACI. So basically, it takes all the people. It's because if you would like to fight corruption in Brazil, corruption should not be a point of view. It should be. It must be. There must be a national consensus to fight corruption. If it is a point of view, well, you will be having corruption party, a political party called corruption. but by the end of the day, let me make this crystal clear. The primary enemy of Brazil is corruption. And corruption decays morals. And corruption decays the fabric of nations. And corruption dissolves countries. Believe it or not, before 2050, there will be many countries disappearing from the map because of corruption. I cannot give you examples because this is very, very dangerous for me to say it, okay? But there are many countries right now, they are dissolving because of corruption. And make no mistake that corruption is done by the hands of the locals, not by the foreigners. Who are those locals? They are the greedy guys. And by the way, let me tell you something. Let me just emphasize this point of view. The corrupt gentlemen, I'm talking about the big corrupt guys. They are ready to sell anything in their countries, even their nation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what is at stake is huge and big. You know, the cheapest price of corruption is money. The highest price of corruption is what? The country, the nation. If you would like to distinguish yourself as a nation, fight corruption, because you know it is the only sacred battle that you can fight with high morale. It is something that you can unite on its basis.
Yes.
Unfortunately, corruption is used by the foreigners in any country, by the way, as a tool to achieve political gains. And by the end of the day, you know, let me provide you with something I was waiting for you to ask me about it, which is a definition of a bribe. Bribe is an economic exchange transaction where we exchange influence and decisions for a return in terms of money, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, you know, I bribe a CEO to buy his influence to award me a contract. And I bribe a president of a country, okay, and you know, I don't want to go into more details, but you know, you can buy the influence of many.
Oh, people are humans in the end of the day, right? If he's a
Yeah, of
CEO,
course.
if he's the person who is the president, or if he's the
Correct,
cleaning
correct.
person and on the bottom of the floor,
And by the
the
way,
company.
you know, I don't want people to say, well, oh my goodness, there is no hope. As you read in the Times of Malta yesterday, I had a piece, very good piece. It's called "There is Corruption, but also Hope." And why do we have hope, by the way? Even in Brazil, why? Because you know, corruption, as we go, I mean, if you look at the past 10 years, corruption is exposed very big time. Every day we have big scandals. If you will just look at the Financial Times headlines, you will find Wirecard. I call it the corruption made in Germany. The Wirecard scandal. Corruption. You know, can you imagine that a company says, I have 2 billion, 1.9 billion euros in the bank as cash, and you will go to the bank and the bank says, sorry, you don't have 1.9 billion. Wirecard, made in Germany. And by the way, if you'll go back, if you'll go right now to Bloomberg and Financial Times or Google News, just Google it. The politicians in Germany, they are really very nervous about it. Even the chancellor there. If you will go to what else? Vincent Files, the money laundering scandal worldwide. So what I would like to say, there is hope for you. For example, you know, right now, the corrupt people will not be secured if they will leave the country with billions or millions of US dollars. You know, the international law now, they can chase them. You can see in Guatemala what happened. In other words, you know, over the past 10 years, I think there are many cases brought against politicians who took money and left their country. Because by the end of the day, you know, they siphoned their national wealth and escaped to European countries. But, you know, let me be very fair here, by the way, it's
Mm-hmm.
well, why did the European banks accepted, you know, deposits from corrupt politicians? Well, this is another question. Well, do you think that they do not know that this money is dirty money? But you know, by the end of the day, we are human beings. We are dealing with business. If you'll go back to Vincent Files, for example, why did banks allow corrupt people, and they know that they are corrupt, deposit illegal money, go to the FinCEN files and read. So what I want to say is that, no, corruption is exposed right now. There are many international, we have the United Nations Convention against Corruption. It is a very important legal document. I think Brazil is a signatory for that agreement. There is hope. Right now, you are a Brazilian US graduate guy who is trying to do something good to his country. Okay, so this is new. This is new, and this gives us hope. I am 100% confident that as long as we believe that we have to maintain our country and our dignity, okay, we will fight corruption from all the corners of the community. We have to be real citizens, by the way. If we are employing our citizenship in a very ethical, patriotic manner, believe it or not, corruption will escape from our country and your country and every country. As you know, corruption costs more than 5% in developed countries of the gross national product. By the way, this is on the average. In some countries, more than 15% of the GNP, sir.
Wow.
More than 15%. And in some countries, more than 50%.
50% of
Yes, sir.
what's drained in corruption?
Yes, sir. More than 50%.
Would you say there's a tendency that the more developed countries have less degrees of corruption, or no?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. The dynamics, the dynamics of corruption. Let me put the question differently, Edson.
Go ahead.
Do you think that the form of governance is related to the levels of corruption? In other words, if we have democracy, does it mean that there is no corruption? If we have autocracy, does it mean that we have corruption? No. I think there is no relationship between the form of governance and corruption. You might have a kingdom, okay? They call it, what do you call it? Monarchy, blah, blah. Oh,
Monarchy, autocracy, dictatorship.
No, monarchy. But if you have a monarchy, like Spain, for example, we have more than 12 monarchies in Europe. Where if you read what happened in Spain with the King of Spain in 2014, 15, 16, etc., you are amazed. Why? I can send you, or I can send you the link. We wrote about this at the AACI. Why does, as per the New York Times, or the Washington Post, I cannot recall, why does the ex-king of Spain accepts $2 million US from a head of Arab state as a bribe or as a gift? Why should he accept a gift? He's a king. If you are a king, would you accept a gift from me? He's a king. So how can you explain his behavior? So it's a kingdom in Spain, but corruption is very rife. And we have a kingdom in Denmark, but the corruption level is very low. I think by the end of the day, if you have justice, even if you have autocracy, corruption levels will be lower. But even under democracies, sometimes corruption is very high. Look at India. There is corruption, and we have one of the biggest democracies, but there is corruption. So by the end of the day, I believe, when it gets complex like right now, go back to the basics. For example, let me tell you this story. If you'll go to Norway, corruption levels are a little bit very low, correct? Good. Now, if you get sick, you go to the hospital. You don't pay any money. If you don't care about the education of your children, they will go to the university. If you are unemployed, you have an employment payment that is enough for you. And you live with dignity. People do not accept to pay bribe because you not have a payer or receiver for bribes, by the way. It is against their culture. The value system is very matured. The rule of law, the 10 principles are applied there, 100% they apply it. If you will ask yourself this simple question, were they born like this? No. In 1800 and 1700, they were very corrupt. It took them time. In other words, people are not born corrupt. People are born to free, equal, okay, and seeking for justice. And the normal stuff, or it's very simple. It's very simple. If you have your rights and you are controlled, by the way, controlled, because without checks and balances, it's difficult. If you have all the rights that you expect from your government, from your society, from your community, from your company, by the way, in many cases, fraudsters said that the CEO was not fair with us. A secretary who over few years spent more $100,000 US said, well, nobody asked me about my petty cash.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, let me tell you this: I can create the best, most sophisticated, corrupt guy you can imagine. Give him unaccountable power. Period. Without any punishment. Period. He is above the law. He is above the law, or she is above the law. He has unaccounted power. He knows that he is above the law. What do you have? Monster, not a human being. And by the way, we have monsters everywhere and all the time.
Yes. Yes, but there is hope, as you said. And
of course there is hope. Of course there is hope. And that's why we are talking about this stuff.
And that's what makes us incentivized to pursue the remedies for everything we talked about, which also includes educating people about how to fight corruption, right? And this podcast is very helpful for everybody out there who wants to understand more about the corruption topic. And
Sure.
so, Mike, it was a very good conversation until now, and we got a lot out of it. Would you have any concluding remarks and something you feel that we should have talked about?
I think it's a good start. It's a good start to lay down the foundation for more discussions, more openness, no taboos about this topic. And it's a good start to engage the community, the academia, the public sector, the decision makers, the parliament members, for example, the judiciary branch of government. It's by the way, it's the time. It's the time to engage all the stakeholders in Brazil to fight corruption, but within the under the law and under the constitution. This is a battle that people should unite for it, but it should not be a point of view. It should be crystal clear. If we disagree on the enemy of the nation, we are not going to win any battle. And the enemy is what? Corruption.
Yes. Well, Mike, thank you very much for the conversation. It was an honor having you here, talking to us.
It's my honor, sir. Thank you, Edson. I wish you all the best and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Profit Talks. Now, do you have any comments or other business-related question? If so, please send us, and we'll be glad to explore it in future episodes. Also, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. We are on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and many others.